Get that trash out of the trauma bay, Greycastle, before you contaminate the sterile field with your sheer lack of ambition, Cedric Fairhaven snapped, his voice echoing sharply against the sterile tiles of the emergency department. He didn't look up from the chart he was aggressively signing, treating the presence of the other man as little more than an architectural inconvenience. The harsh fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, underscoring the tension that rippled through the nursing station. Vincent Greycastle said nothing, merely nodding once with a stoic, impassive expression that infuriated Cedric more than any retort could have. He picked up the biohazard bag with a gloved hand, his movements precise and economical, effectively invisible in a room screaming for attention. St. Jude's Memorial Hospital was a sprawling beast of glass and concrete, a place where egos often outsized the budget, and hierarchy was the only religion strictly observed. In the ecosystem of the emergency department, Vincent Greycastle occupied the lowest rung of the ladder, or at least that was the narrative crafted by the day shift. He was the quiet new nurse, a man in his late 30s with greying temples and eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. He had transferred from a generic VA hospital 2 months ago, with a resume that was technically flawless, but conspicuously vague. To Cedric Fairhaven, the senior resident with a pedigree from Yale and a personality tailored for reality television, Vincent was an anomaly that needed to be crushed. Cedric thrived on the chaotic energy of the ER, feeding on the adrenaline and the adoration of the junior staff. Vincent, conversely, seemed to absorb the chaos, moving through the trauma bays like a shadow. He spoke only when necessary, never laughed at the break-room gossip, and took the shifts no one else wanted. "He gives me the creeps," Callista whispered, leaning over the nursing station counter. She adjusted her stethoscope, glancing at Vincent, who was currently restocking the crash cart in Bay 4. "He stands so still, like a statue." "He's just dull, Callista," Delphinia replied, typing furiously on the intake keyboard. She blew a strand of hair out of her face. "Some people don't have a spark. They punch the clock, they wipe the blood, they go home to their cats. He's a drone. A drone who takes the overflow patients so I don't have to," Fenella chimed in from the triage desk, sipping an iced coffee. "So let him be weird, as long as he keeps Fairhaven off my back." Rowan Nightcrest, the attending physician for the night, overheard the exchange as he reviewed a chest X-ray. Rowan was a man of few words himself, exhausted by the politics of the hospital administration. He had watched Vincent for weeks. He noticed things the others missed. He noticed that Vincent's scrubs were always immaculately pressed. He noticed that when a patient in room 3 lashed out in a drug-induced psychosis, Vincent hadn't flinched. He had simply sidestepped the swinging fist with a minimal shift of weight, calm as a stagnant pond, and talked the man down without raising his voice a decibel. "Fairhaven is riding him hard today," Rowan noted, walking past the nurses. "Cedric hates anyone he can't charm or intimidate," Elsinora, the charge nurse, said. She was a woman of iron constitution who ran the floor with a terrifying efficiency. She respected competence, and she was still undecided on Vincent. "Greycastle takes it. Maybe that's the problem. He has no spine." Inside Trauma Bay, the air was thick with the metallic scent of old blood. Vincent finished the restocking, his eyes scanning the equipment. Every syringe, every ampule of epinephrine, every laryngoscope blade was checked. His internal rhythm was different from the frenetic pace of the hospital. In his mind, the ER was slow, painfully slow. He was used to working in the back of a heaving transport under enemy fire, where a second was a lifetime. Here, he had minutes. It felt like a luxury he didn't deserve. Cedric swept into the room, followed by 2 wide-eyed medical students. "And this," Cedric announced theatrically, pointing at the perfectly arranged cart, "is the only thing Nurse Greycastle is good for. Logistics. The man is a glorified stock clerk." The students chuckled nervously. Vincent turned, peeling off his gloves. "The politic in the 3rd drawer was expired, Dr. Fairhaven," Vincent said softly. His voice was gravel, low and steady. "I replaced it with a fresh batch from the central supply." Cedric's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I would have noticed that during the code." "Perhaps," Vincent said, making no move to argue. "But now you don't have to. Don't talk back to me, Greycastle. Just clear the bay. We have an incoming cardiac arrest." Vincent nodded and stepped out, fading into the corridor. He didn't feel the sting of the insult. He had been screamed at by Master Chiefs and Admirals. The petulance of a resident who had never seen a wound he didn't make himself was irrelevant. But as he walked away, he felt the familiar itch between his shoulder blades, the sense that the peace he had cultivated was fragile, and the noise of his past was waiting for a frequency to tune into. The shift deteriorated rapidly after midnight. A multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate flooded the ER with critical patients. The controlled chaos that Cedric loved spiraled into actual chaos, which he did not. The trauma bays were full. Gurneys lined the hallways. The air was a cacophony of alarms, shouting voices, and the ripping of Velcro straps. Vincent was assigned to Bay 2, assisting Rowan Nightcrest with a teenager who had gone through a windshield. They worked in a quiet tandem, Vincent anticipating Rowan's needs before the doctor vocalized them. Suction, clamp, suture. It was a dance of efficiency. "Good work, Vincent," Rowan muttered, tying off a bleeder. "Check on Bay 1. Fairhaven is screaming for blood." Vincent slipped out of the room and moved toward Bay 1. Inside, the situation was critical. A middle-aged man, pinned in his car for an hour, was crashing. His blood pressure was plummeting, and his chest was heaving ineffectiveness. Cedric was sweating, his usually perfectly coiffed hair plastered to his forehead. "I can't get the line!" Cedric shouted, throwing a catheter onto the floor. "His veins are collapsed! Someone get me an IO drill now!" Elsinora was sprinting for the kit, but the patient was seizing. "He's in tension!" Cedric yelled, looking at the monitor. "Needle decompression. Give me a 14 gauge. Callista fumbled with the packaging, her hands shaking under Cedric's screaming. I can't get it open!" "Move!" Cedric shoved her aside, grabbing the needle. He plunged it into the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. A hiss of air escaped, but the patient didn't improve. The oxygen saturation continued to drop. "It's not working! Why isn't it working?" Cedric froze. The freeze was a phenomenon known well in combat medicine, but in a civilian hospital, it was a career ender. He stared at the monitor, his mind locking up as the beep of the heart rate slowed ominously. Vincent stepped into the room. He didn't run. He flowed. He assessed the situation in a heartbeat. The needle was too short for the patient's muscular build. It hadn't penetrated the pleural space fully. The man was suffocating while the doctor watched. Without asking for permission, Vincent reached past Cedric. He didn't shove. He occupied the space the doctor had vacated mentally. He took a scalpel from the tray. "Greycastle, what are you doing?" Cedric gasped, snapping out of his trance. "Put that down." "Finger thoracostomy," Vincent said calmly. "The needle failed. He needs air." "You are a nurse. You are not authorized to cut." Vincent ignored him. With a single, decisive motion, he made an incision in the 5th intercostal space, anterior axillary line. He inserted a gloved finger, swept the lung away from the chest wall, and released a massive rush of trapped air and blood. The patient gasped, a jagged, beautiful sound of life returning. The monitor beeping accelerated, stabilizing. The room went silent. Cedric stared at the incision, then at Vincent. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. The humiliation of freezing was compounded by the competence of the man he had mocked for weeks. "Get out," Cedric hissed. Vincent wiped the blood from his glove onto a towel. "He needs a chest tube, doctor. 36 French." "I said get out!" Cedric screamed, his voice cracking. "You assaulted my patient. You practiced medicine without a license. Get out of my trauma bay." Vincent looked at the patient, saw the chest rising and falling, and nodded. He placed the scalpel on the tray and walked out. 10 minutes later, he was summoned to the charge nurse's office. Elsinora sat behind her desk, looking tired. Cedric was there, pacing, vibrating with indignation. "He went rogue, Elsinora. He cut the patient. I had it under control." Cedric lied, though his shaking hands betrayed him. Elsinora looked at Vincent. "Is this true? Did you perform a surgical procedure?" The patient was in arrest due to tension pneumothorax. The needle decompression failed. "I acted to preserve life," Vincent stated, his hands clasped behind his back, standing at a modified parade rest. "It was outside your scope of practice," Elsinora said, her voice hard. "You know the liability you've exposed this hospital to? Even if you saved him, you broke the law." "I understand," Vincent said. "You're lucky Dr. Fairhaven isn't pressing charges for assault," Elsinora sighed, rubbing her temples. "This is a formal reprimand, Vincent. One more incident, one more toe out of line, and you are terminated. And you will apologize to Dr. Fairhaven for undermining his authority." Vincent looked at Cedric. He saw the fear behind the arrogance. He saw a boy playing God, terrified that someone would pull back the curtain. "I apologize for the disruption, Dr. Fairhaven," Vincent said, his voice devoid of sarcasm. Cedric sneered. "Go change the bedpans in room 4, Grey Castle. That's your speed." The shift ended at 700. The morning sun was trying to burn off the fog that clung to the city skyline. Vincent changed into his civilian clothes, jeans, a nondescript grey t-shirt, and heavy boots. He walked to his car, an old, reliable pickup truck parked in the furthest corner of the lot. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. He knew who it was, the VA counselor checking in, or maybe his former commanding officer, casually seeing if the asset was ready to come in from the cold. Vincent wasn't ready. He wanted this life. He wanted the simplicity of orders he could ignore, of enemies that were microscopic rather than ideological. He drove home to a small apartment that was sparse, almost monastic. No pictures on the walls, no mementos, just a bed, a table, and a locked steel case under the floorboards of the closet. He slept for 4 hours, dreamless and dark, waking instantly when a car backfired on the street below. When he returned for his next shift that evening, the atmosphere in the ER had shifted. The story of the rogue nurse had spread. Callista and Delphinia stopped talking when he walked by. They didn't look at him with awe. They looked at him with suspicion. Cedric had spun the narrative effectively. Vincent was a loose cannon, a cowboy nurse who got lucky and nearly killed a patient to stroke his own ego. "I heard he used to be a medic in the army," Fenella whispered, loud enough for Vincent to hear as he logged into the computer. "Probably got kicked out for doing crazy stuff like that." "But he saved the guy," Rowan Nightcrest said, appearing at the desk with a cup of coffee. He looked directly at Vincent. "Nice save last night, Greycastle." Vincent didn't look up from the triage screen. "Just doing the job, Doctor." "Don't encourage him, Rowan," Cedric said, walking past with a clipboard. "Management is watching him. One slip-up and he's gone. I'm personally documenting everything." The night wore on, heavy and humid. The patients were difficult. Drunks, drug seekers, and minor injuries that clogged the waiting room. Vincent worked the triage desk, enduring the verbal abuse of patients who had waited 4 hours for a Tylenol. He remained unfailingly polite, his patience infinite. At 2200 hours, the phone at the main desk rang. It wasn't the usual external line. It was the red phone, the direct line to the hospital director's office, which usually only rang during mass casualty drills or VIP admissions. Elsinora picked it up. Her face went pale. She listened for a long time, saying only, "Yes, sir, and I understand, but—" and right away. She hung up and looked at the staff. The ER went quiet. "Clear Bay 1 and Bay 2, Elsinora ordered, her voice trembling slightly. "We have an inbound transport, high priority, federal." "Federal?" Cedric laughed. "What, a senator stubbed his toe?" "No," Elsinora said, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Vincent. He was wiping down a counter, his back to her. "They didn't say who the patient is. They said the transport is landing on the roof in 5 minutes, and they demanded security clearance for the perimeter." "On the roof?" Callista gasped. "We haven't used the helipad in 3 years. It's not rated for heavy birds." "It is tonight," Elsinora said. A low, thrumming sound began to vibrate through the building. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of a medical evac helicopter. It was deeper, a rhythmic thwop, thwop, thwop that shook the glass in the automatic doors. It was the sound of heavy rotors, the sound of power. Vincent stopped wiping the counter. He knew that sound. He felt it in his teeth, in the old shrapnel scar on his thigh. It was a Sikorsky SH-60 Seahawk. Navy. "Dr. Fairhaven, you're the lead," Elsinora said. "Get your team ready." Cedric straightened his coat, looking important. "Finally some real action. Probably a high-ranking officer. I'll handle it." The sound grew deafening. Dust fell from the ceiling tiles. Outside the ambulance bay doors, blue and red lights flashed, but these weren't ambulances. 2 black SUVs screeched to a halt, blocking the entrance. Men in dark suits with earpieces exited, moving with rigid professionalism to secure the lobby. "What is going on?" Fenella squeaked. The elevator doors from the roof helipad pinged open, the hallway flooded with noise, but it wasn't a gurney that came out first. It was a squad of 4 men in full tactical gear, weapons slung but at the ready, moving in a diamond formation. They wore no unit patches, but their bearing was unmistakable. SEALs. Behind them, 2 more operators pushed a stretcher, carrying a man whose face was obscured by an oxygen mask and heavy bandages. He was thrashing, fighting the restraints. Cedric stepped forward, putting on his best authoritative voice. "I am Dr. Fairhaven, the senior resident. Bring the patient to Trauma Bay 1. I need a full report." The lead operator, a giant of a man with a beard and eyes like flint, ignored Cedric entirely. He scanned the room, ignoring the doctors, the nurses, the security guards. He looked past Elsinora. He looked past Rowan. His eyes locked onto the man standing quietly by the crash cart in the corner. The operator raised a hand, signaling his team to halt. The ER fell into a terrified silence. The operator walked past Cedric, brushing him aside with a shoulder as if he were a curtain. He marched straight up to Vincent Greycastle. The operator stopped 3 feet away. He snapped his heels together and, to the shock of everyone watching, came to a sharp, respectful position of attention. "Master Chief," the operator said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the room. "We have a critical situation. Code Black. The Admiral said you were the only one who could handle the extraction. We need you." Vincent sighed, a long, weary exhalation. He carefully folded the rag he was holding and placed it on the counter. He looked at the operator, then at Cedric, whose jaw was practically on the floor. "I'm on shift, Commander," Vincent said quietly. "Not anymore, sir," the operator replied, holding out a secure satellite phone. "The president is on the line for you." The silence in the emergency department was absolute, a vacuum created by the sudden collision of two incompatible worlds. The mundane hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of sirens seemed to fade into irrelevance as Vincent Greycastle held the secure satellite phone to his ear. He didn't hunch over it. His posture straightened, the subtle slouch of the tired nurse vanishing to reveal a spine of tempered steel. "Greycastle," he said. His voice was no longer the soft gravel of the triage desk. It was crisp, authoritative, a tone that expected immediate compliance. He listened for 10 seconds, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, ignoring Cedric Fairhaven's erratic breathing and the terrified stares of Callista and Fenella. "Understood, Mr. President," Vincent said. "Status of the package?" A pause. "Roger. We are secure at this location. I am assuming command of the medical assets on site. ETA for extraction?" Another pause. "Make it 20. If he's not stabilized by then, he won't survive the flight to Bethesda." He handed the phone back to the SEAL operator, who pocketed it and stepped back, his weapon scanning the perimeter. Vincent turned to the room. The transition was terrifying to witness. The man who had quietly stocked syringes was gone. In his place stood a predator who happened to be wearing scrubs. "Clear the room," Vincent ordered. He didn't shout, but the command hit the staff like a physical wave. "All non-essential personnel out. Now." "Now wait just a minute." Cedric Fairhaven found his voice, stepping forward, his face flushed with a mix of indignation and panic. "You cannot order my staff around, Greycastle. I don't care who was on that phone. This is my ER, and you are a nurse who is already on probation. Security, remove these men." The lead SEAL, the giant who had called Vincent Master Chief, moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast to track. In a heartbeat, he was in Cedric's personal space, looming over him like a monolith. "Sir," the operator rumbled, his voice low and dangerous. "Under the authority of the National Security Act, this facility is now a temporary operating base. You can assist the Master Chief, or you can be detained in the custodial closet until we depart. Choose." Cedric sputtered, looking around for support. He found none. Elsinora was watching Vincent with wide, calculating eyes. Rowan Nightcrest had already moved to the trauma bed, putting on fresh gloves. "Vincent," Rowan said, his voice steady. "What do you need?" "I need a surgeon I can trust, Rowan," Vincent said, acknowledging the doctor for the first time as a peer. "And I need the room sealed. Delphinia, kill the cameras in this bay. Callista, get 2 units of O-negative, uncross-matched pressure bags. Now." The nurses moved instantly, driven by a primal instinct to obey the alpha in the room. "What about me?" Cedric demanded, his voice shrinking. Vincent looked at him. There was no malice in his eyes, only cold utility. "You're an extra pair of hands, Fairhaven. Scrub in or get out. I don't have time to babysit your ego." Vincent turned his back on the resident and approached the patient. The man on the gurney was a ruin. His flight suit was shredded, soaked in dark arterial blood. A jagged piece of metal protruded from his upper right quadrant, shrapnel from an IED or a heavy rocket. "Commander Vance?" Vincent said, leaning close to the patient's ear. "It's Vin, can you hear me?" The injured man's eyes fluttered open, panic warring with recognition. He gripped Vincent's arm with a bloody hand. "Vin! Trap! It was a trap!" "Easy, brother. You're home. I've got you." Vincent looked up at Rowan. "Abdominal aortic injury suspected. Liver laceration. Potential lung involvement. We can't move him to the OR upstairs. He'll bleed out in the elevator. We operate here." "Here!" Elsinora gasped from the doorway. "Vincent, this is a trauma bay, not a surgical theatre. The infection risk is lower than the risk of death." Vincent cut her off. "Get the crash cart. Open the thoracotomy tray. This is damage control surgery. We aren't fixing him pretty. We're keeping him alive." The next hour was a blur of controlled violence. The trauma bay, usually a place of sterile procedure, transformed into a field hospital. The SEALs stood guard at the doors, their backs to the medical team, creating a perimeter of silence within the chaos. Vincent stood on the right side of the patient, Rowan on the left. Cedric, pale and trembling, hovered at the foot of the bed, holding retractors. He had tried to assert control twice, and twice he had been ignored completely. "Scalpel," Vincent said. He didn't wait for a nurse to hand it to him. He grabbed it from the tray. With steady, unhesitating hands, he extended the incision down the midline of the abdomen. Blood welled up, dark and fast. "Suction," Rowan commanded, matching Vincent's pace. "My God, the liver is shattered." "Pack it," Vincent ordered. "Lap pads. All of them. We need to tamponade the bleeding before we can find the source." Vincent's hands moved with a fluidity that defied logic. He wasn't just a medic. He was operating with the skill of a trauma surgeon who had spent decades in the worst hellholes on Earth. He identified the bleeder, a tear in the hepatic artery, and clamped it blind, guided only by tactile memory and instinct. "How?" Cedric whispered, staring at Vincent's hands. "How do you know how to do this? Nurses don't learn this." "I wasn't just a medic, Fairhaven," Vincent murmured, his focus entirely on the vessel. "I was an independent duty corpsman with the development group. When you're 6 hours from extraction in the Hindu Kush, you learn to be the surgeon, the anesthesiologist, and the priest." The monitor alarmed. "BP is dropping. 60/40, Callista called out, her voice high with fear. "Fluids wide open," Vincent said. "Push a gram of TXA. Rowan, hold pressure here. I need to get that shrapnel out. It's pressing on the diaphragm." Vincent reached into the abdominal cavity. The metal shard was jagged, hooked around a rib. It required force to remove, but delicate force. One slip and he would puncture the lung or sever the vena cava. "Vincent," Rowan warned. "It's close to the heart. I see it." The room held its breath. Even the SEALs seemed to tense up. Vincent closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, centering himself. The noise of the ER, the hum of the lights, the judgment of his colleagues, it all fell away. There was only the metal and the flesh. With a smooth, twisting motion, he pulled. A gush of blood followed, but Vincent was ready. He clamped the vessel instantly. The metal shard clattered into a metal bowl with a heavy clunk. "Clear," Vincent exhaled. "Suture. 2-0 silk." As he stitched, creating a temporary closure, the dynamic in the room shifted permanently. The nurses weren't looking at him as the quiet new guy anymore. They were looking at him as if he were a mythical creature who had shed its skin. Elsinora, watching from the corner, crossed her arms. She was furious at the breach of protocol, terrified of the liability, but she couldn't deny what she was seeing. He had saved a man who, by all rights, should be dead. "He's stabilizing," Rowan said, checking the monitor. "Pressure is up to 90 systolic. Heart rate coming down." "Good," Vincent said. He stepped back, stripping off his blood-soaked gloves. He looked at the SEAL leader. "Package is stable for transport. You have a 20-minute window before he needs a Level 1 trauma center for the reconstruction. Get him to Bethesda." "Roger that, Master Chief," the operator said. He tapped his earpiece. "Eagle 1, this is ground team. Package is secure. Prep for immediate dust-off." The team moved in to transfer the patient to their specialized stretcher. As they lifted him, The commander looked at Vincent. "You coming with us, Vin?" The admiral cleared a seat. "You can come in from the cold. Full reinstatement. Rank, pension, the works." Vincent looked at the helicopter blades spinning outside the glass doors. He looked at the chaos of the ER, at the terrified faces of the staff, at the blood on his scrubs. He looked at Cedric, who was staring at the floor, broken. "No," Vincent said softly. "My war is over, Jack. I'm just a nurse." The commander studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "If you say so. But you know how this works. Once the trident is out, it never really goes back in." The departure of the helicopter was as violent as its arrival. The wind whipped the trees in the parking lot, and the roar shook the foundations of St. Jude's. Then it was gone, leaving only the ringing in their ears and the smell of aviation fuel. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Vincent stood in the middle of the trauma bay, alone. The staff hovered in the hallway, unsure of how to re-enter his orbit. The biohazard bag he had been holding at the start of the shift lay forgotten in the corner. Cedric was the first to speak. He didn't shout this time. He walked into the room, looking at the blood on the floor, then at Vincent. His arrogance had been stripped away, leaving a confused, frightened young man. "Who are you?" Cedric asked, his voice trembling. "Really?" Vincent turned to the sink and began to scrub his hands, the methodical motion of a man washing away a stain that wouldn't lift. "I told you, Doctor. I'm Vincent Greycastle, staff nurse." "Don't give me that," Cedric snapped, a flash of his old petulance returning, though weaker. "The President called you. Those men, they took orders from you. You performed surgery that—" "I did what was necessary to save a patient," Vincent interrupted, drying his hands. "Just like I did with the chest tube. Just like I do when I restock the carts you ignore." He turned to face them. The entire staff was gathered now. Elsinora, Rowan, Callista, Delphinia, Fenella. "You lied on your application," Elsinora said, stepping forward. She held a clipboard like a shield. "You omitted significant military service, special operations capability. That is grounds for immediate termination." "I didn't lie," Vincent said calmly. "I listed my service as Medical Corps. I didn't specify the unit because the unit doesn't exist on paper. And I didn't want this." He gestured to the room, to the fear in their eyes. "I wanted to do the job. I wanted to help people without the politics, without the killing. I wanted to be quiet." "Well, you failed at that," Fenella whispered, though there was a hint of admiration in her voice now. "Vincent," Rowan stepped in, placing a hand on Elsinora's shoulder to stop her from escalating. "You just saved a life that no one else in this hospital could have saved. Maybe even the state. That has to count for something." "It counts that he turned my ER into a black site," Cedric shouted, trying to regain control of the narrative. "He endangered us all. What if those men had been followed? What if— "If they had been followed," Vincent said, his voice dropping to absolute zero, "you would all be dead before you heard the glass break. The only reason you are safe is because they were here, and because I was here." Cedric recoiled as if slapped. "I'm going to finish my shift," Vincent said. He walked past them, moving toward the nurse's station. "Bay 4 needs to be turned over, and Mrs. Higgins in room 6 needs her pain meds." He sat down at the computer, logging in as if nothing had happened. But the air had changed. The shadows seemed to cling to him a little tighter. Elsinora watched him for a long time. She looked at Cedric, who was frantically typing on his phone, likely drafting a report to the board to save his own skin. She looked at Rowan, who was watching Vincent with a newfound respect. "He stays," Elsinora said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "For now." But Vincent knew it wasn't over. He felt the prickle on the back of his neck. The commander was right. You don't just walk away. The extraction had been too public, the call from the president too open. The veil of anonymity he had carefully stitched together over 2 years was torn. As he typed his notes, patient, John Doe. Condition, transferred to higher level of care. Procedure, exploratory laparotomy, emergency. He saw a black sedan pull up to the curb outside the ER entrance, through the glass doors. It didn't have government plates. It sat there, idling in the dark. Vincent stopped typing. His hand drifted unconsciously to his waistband, where a weapon used to be. He had wanted peace. But peace, he realized with a sinking heart, was just the intermission between wars. And the intermission was over. The black sedan did not contain assassins, but to the administrative board of St. Jude's Memorial, its occupants were far more dangerous. They were lawyers from the Department of Defense, flanked by the hospital's own legal counsel, a phalanx of charcoal suits moving through the automatic doors at 0800 hours like a funeral procession for someone's career. They didn't bring guns, they brought briefcases, the heavy, leather-bound weapons of bureaucratic warfare designed to sanitize incidents that threatened liability. Vincent Greycastle had not gone home. He sat in the break room, the fluorescent lights humming a low, headache-inducing frequency. He was sipping lukewarm coffee from a styrofoam cup, staring at a jagged crack in the linoleum floor. In his mind, he wasn't in a hospital break room. He was back in a holding cell in a redacted location, waiting for debrief. The feeling was identical. The suspension of time, the silence before the judgment. When the summon came, delivered by a nervous-looking security guard who refused to make eye contact, Vincent stood up slowly. His shift had technically ended an hour ago, but he knew the clock on this particular mission hadn't stopped. The executive conference room on the top floor was a world away from the blood and grit of the emergency department. It was sterile, air-conditioned to a chill that felt artificial and smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Mr. Sterling, the hospital's chief risk officer. Sterling was a man whose entire professional existence was dedicated to ensuring St. Jude's never appeared on the nightly news for the wrong reasons. He had the eyes of a shark and the smile of a funeral director. To his right sat Cedric Fairhaven. The resident looked refreshed, having showered and changed into his crispest, most blindingly white coat. The terror of the night before, the trembling hands, the frozen panic, had been scrubbed away, replaced by a veneer of smug righteousness. He had spent the morning dictating his version of events, crafting a narrative where he was the valiant captain of a ship besieged by a mutinous, rogue nurse. Elsinora stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were white. Her expression was unreadable, but her posture screamed defensive tension. Rowan Nightcrest sat opposite Cedric, slumped in his chair, looking exhausted and utterly bored by the theatre of it all. And then there was the woman in the sharp navy suit. She sat to Sterling's left, perfectly still, her hands resting on a closed folder. She had introduced herself only as Ms. Halloway, representing the interests of the United States Navy, and had not spoken since. "Mr. Greycastle," Sterling began, not gesturing for Vincent to sit. It was a power move, intended to make Vincent feel like a truant schoolboy. "We are reviewing the events of last night. Events which, frankly, defy any precedent in this hospital's 100-year history." Sterling tapped a stack of papers. "Dr. Fairhaven has submitted a formal incident report." He alleges that you usurped command during a critical resuscitation, performed unauthorized surgical procedures without a license, and facilitated the armed commandeering of our trauma bay by unknown combatants. These are career-ending accusations, perhaps prison-ending. Vincent stood at ease, his feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He didn't look at the floor. He looked Sterling directly in the eye. I performed a damage control laparotomy to repair a hepatic artery avulsion. The patient survived. The alternative was a fatality in your elevator before he reached the OR. You are a nurse, Cedric interjected, his voice sharp and confident. He turned to the board members, performing for his audience. This is exactly the problem. Nurse Greycastle has a history of overstepping. He believes his previous experiences exempt him from the hierarchy of modern medicine. He is not a surgeon. He is not a doctor. He has no privileges to cut. He is a liability, walking around in scrubs. Vincent slowly turned his head to look at Cedric. The movement was predatory in its slowness. I am a special amphibious reconnaissance corpsman, Vincent corrected him, his voice level, devoid of anger, but heavy with weight. My scope of practice is dictated by the mission requirements when standard care is unavailable. Last night, Trauma Bay 1 was not a civilian ER. It was a forward operating base. This is a civilian hospital. Sterling slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. We are not in Kandahar, Mr. Greycastle. We are in downtown Seattle. You exposed us to millions in potential lawsuits. You violated the Medical Practice Act. You violated JCAHO standards. If that man had died— He didn't, Vincent said. That is luck, Cedric sneered, leaning forward. Sheer dumb luck. You guessed, Greycastle. You guessed and you got lucky. And next time, when you decide you're a neurosurgeon and kill someone, who pays for that? The hospital. Ms. Holloway, the Navy lawyer, finally moved. She opened the folder in front of her. The sound of the paper turning was the only noise in the room. She hadn't looked at Cedric or Sterling. Her eyes were fixed on Vincent, assessing him. Mr. Sterling, she said. Her voice was soft, like ice water, but it carried an authority that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. If I may? Sterling paused, his mouth half open. He nodded, deferring to the federal authority he couldn't quite figure out. Master Chief Greycastle is technically correct, Holloway said. Cedric scoffed. Technically? There is no technically about assault with a scalpel. Holloway turned her head slowly to look at Cedric. Her gaze was withering. Dr. Fairhaven, you will be silent. I am speaking on matters of national security. Cedric's mouth snapped shut. Under Title 50 of the United States Code, specifically the Defense Production Act and the emergency executive powers invoked by the President during the extraction call last night, Holloway continued, reading from a document stamped with red classification markers. Any facility housing a Tier 1 asset under active threat is temporarily federalized. For exactly 63 minutes last night, Trauma Bay 1 was sovereign U.S. military soil. She looked up at Sterling. On that soil, Master Chief Greycastle was the ranking medical officer. His jurisdiction superseded yours. His jurisdiction superseded Dr. Fairhaven's. Legally speaking, Mr. Sterling, for that hour, Vincent Greycastle was the hospital. The silence that followed was deafening. Cedric looked as if he had been slapped. Sterling paled, his legal arguments crumbling into dust. However, Holloway continued, turning her gaze back to Vincent, and her tone hardened. That does not absolve you of the hospital's internal HR policies once the helicopter departed. The Navy protected you for the hour, Vincent. But you are a civilian employee now. You walked away from the Trident. You can't have it both ways. You can't be the ghost in the machine and the warlord on the ground. I know, Vincent said softly. The board demands his termination, Sterling insisted, sensing a flicker of an opening in Holloway's rebuke. Sovereign soil or not, he is disruptive. He undermines the chain of command. Dr. Fairhaven cannot be expected to run an emergency department with a subordinate who thinks he is a general. The staff is terrified of him. The staff respects him, a voice cut in from the side. Rowan Nightcrest leaned forward, placing his hands on the table. If you fire him, I resign. Effective immediately. Sterling blinked, blindsided. Excuse me? Dr. Nightcrest, you are tenured. You heard me, Rowan said, rubbing his eyes, the fatigue etched into his face. I've been here 10 years. I've seen residents like Cedric come and go. Most of them are dangerous because they don't know what they don't know. They have egos bigger than their skill sets. Vincent? Vincent knows exactly what he's doing. He saved 2 lives last night, the patient's and arguably Cedric's career. My career? Cedric squeaked. If that SEAL had died under your care because you couldn't get a line or float a chest tube, Rowan said, his voice cold, the Navy wouldn't just be here with lawyers. They would have torn this place apart. Vincent didn't undermine you, Cedric. He carried you. I don't need him, Cedric shrilled, his composure cracking entirely now. He stood up, knocking his chair back. I am the senior resident. I am the one with the MD. You froze, Elsinora said. She spoke from the window, her voice heavy with finality. She turned to face the room. I saw it, Cedric. I was there. You froze on the needle decompression. You froze on the laparotomy. You were watching a man die because you were too scared to act and too proud to ask for help. Vincent acted. The room was thick with tension. The political lines were being drawn, not by rank or title, but by the brutal currency of competence. Sterling looked from Cedric to Rowan to Elsinora. He saw the shift. He saw that firing Vincent might solve a liability problem, but create a mutiny. We will adjourn, Sterling said abruptly, gathering his papers. No decision has been made. Mr. Greycastle, you are placed on administrative leave pending a final review. Surrender your badge to security on the way out. Vincent unclipped his badge and placed it on the mahogany table. It made a small clack sound in the quiet room. He didn't look back at Cedric. He just walked out. The meeting was adjourned without a verdict. Vincent was placed on administrative leave, pending a final decision. He was escorted out of the building by security, stripping off his badge at the desk. He walked to his truck in the blinding morning light. He felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. He could move on, go to a cabin in Montana, disappear for real this time. But as he put the key in the ignition, his phone buzzed. It wasn't the secure line this time. It was a text from Fenella. Mass casualty incident. Bus rollover on Route 9. Pediatric transport. All hands recall. We need you. Vincent stared at the phone. He was suspended. He was practically fired. He owed St. Jude's nothing. They had mocked him, isolated him, and tried to destroy him. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He turned the truck off. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a spare stethoscope he kept there. A battered Littman he'd carried for 15 years. He walked back to the ER entrance. The security guard, a young man named Davis who had heard the rumors, stepped in front of him. Mr. Greycastle, I can't let you in. Mr. Sterling said, There's a bus rollover, Davis, Vincent said. Kids, step aside. Davis looked at Vincent's eyes. He saw the same steel that had made the SEAL commander snap to attention. Davis stepped aside. The ER was a scene from Dante's Inferno. The bus had been carrying a youth hockey team. Screams of children echoed off the walls. Every bay was double-bunked. Blood was slick on the floors. Cedric was in the center of the intake area, spinning in circles. He was shouting orders that contradicted each other. "Get that gurney to Bay 2. No, X-ray first. Wait, where is the airway kit?" He was losing the room. The nurses, Callista, Delphinia, Fenella, were frantic, their eyes darting around for leadership that wasn't there. Vincent walked to the center of the nursing station. He didn't yell. He picked up the comms mic for the overhead PA system. "All stations, this is Grey Castle." His voice boomed through the speakers, calm, deep, and anchoring. "Initiate mass casualty protocol Delta. Triage officer is Elsinora to the ramp. Walking wounded to the cafeteria. Red tags to bays 1 through 4. Yellow tags to the hallway. Green tags to the waiting room." He put the mic down and looked at Cedric. "Dr. Fairhaven, you are on airway management for Bay 1 and 2. Go." Cedric looked at him. For a moment, the old defiance flared in his eyes. He wanted to scream about the suspension. He wanted to call security. But then he looked at a 10-year-old boy on a stretcher, gasping for air through a crushed trachea. The reality of the horror broke through his ego. I can't manage 2 airways," Cedric stammered. "Then take Bay 1, Vincent said. "I'll take Bay 2. "You're suspended," Cedric whispered. "Does the kid care?" Vincent asked. Cedric stared at him, then nodded once, a jerky, humbled motion. No, he doesn't." Cedric ran to Bay 1. For the next 6 hours, Vincent Grey Castle didn't operate. He didn't cut. He didn't perform miracles. He performed the most difficult task of all. He conducted the orchestra. He moved supplies. He calmed terrified parents. He started IVs when the junior nurses missed. He was everywhere and nowhere, a force of stabilization. When the dust settled, 30 children had been treated. All of them were stable. Mr. Sterling stood on the observation deck overlooking the ER floor. He had watched the entire thing. He watched the suspended nurse coordinate a disaster response better than his highly paid administrators. He watched the staff look to Vincent before they looked to the doctors. Ms. Halloway stood beside him. "You have a choice, Mr. Sterling," she said. "You can fire him for breaking the rules, or you can promote him for writing the book on how to survive them." 3 days later, Vincent was called back to the office. The table was smaller this time, just Sterling, Elsinora, and Rowan. "We have reviewed the incident with the bus," Sterling said. He looked tired. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pragmatic defeat. "And the legal team has come to a creative understanding regarding the Navy incident." Vincent waited. "We are offering you the position of clinical nurse specialist for trauma operations," Sterling said, sliding a contract across the table. "It comes with a significant raise, and it puts you in charge of disaster protocols. You would answer only to the medical director." Vincent looked at the contract. It was vindication. It was power. It was the system bowing to him. "No," Vincent said. Elsinora gasped. "Vincent, are you crazy? It's everything you deserve." "I don't want to be an administrator," Vincent said. "I don't want to write protocols in an office. I want to be at the bedside." "Then what do you want?" Rowan asked, smiling slightly. He knew the answer. "I want the night shift," Vincent said. "I want my job back. Staff nurse. And I want Dr. Fairhaven to undergo a mandatory 6-month remedial rotation on trauma assessment." Sterling blinked. "You want to demote the chief resident?" "He has potential," Vincent said, surprisingly charitable. "But he's dangerous because he thinks he's finished learning. Break him down, build him back up. He might make a good doctor one day. But right now he's a liability." Sterling sighed. "Done." Vincent stood up. He didn't shake hands. He simply nodded and walked out. When he returned to the floor that night, the atmosphere had transformed. There was no mocking, no whispers of the quiet weirdo. As he walked past the triage desk, Fenella straightened up. "Evening, Vincent." "Evening, Fenella." He walked into the break room. Cedric was there, packing a box. He had been stripped of his senior resident status and assigned to the remedial track, reporting to Rowan. Cedric looked up. His face was a mix of shame and resentment, but underneath it, there was something else. Respect. Or perhaps fear. "You won," Cedric muttered. "It wasn't a fight, Cedric," Vincent said, opening his locker. "It was a job." "Why didn't you let them fire me?" Cedric asked. "I tried to ruin you." Vincent paused. He looked at the young doctor, seeing the fear of failure that drove the arrogance. "Because you intubated that kid on the bus on the first try. You have good hands. You just have a bad head. Fix the head, and the hands will save people." Vincent closed his locker and walked out into the hallway. The ER was humming. The lights were harsh. The smell of antiseptic was sharp. It wasn't the Hindu Kush. It wasn't a Black Hawk. But it was a battlefield all the same. Callista ran up to him. "Vincent! Bay 3! Cardiac arrest! We need you!" Vincent Greycastle didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded, his face settling into that familiar, stoic mask. "I'm on it," he said. He moved down the hallway, not as a hero, nor as a victim, but as a professional. The mocking silence had been replaced by a silence of a different kind, the silence of a team waiting for the conductor to lift the baton. And for Vincent, that was the only silence that mattered. True strength does not require an audience, and competence does not need to shout to be heard. In a world obsessed with status and recognition, Vincent Greycastle reminds us that the most valuable people in the room are often the quietest. They are the ones who prepare while others boast, who act while others freeze, and who save lives not for the glory, but because it is their duty. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. If you enjoyed this story of the silent professional who turned the tables on arrogance, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the unsung heroes walking among us. Click the bell icon so you never miss a chapter. Stay safe and stay quiet.